Hello and welcome to our Lakeside chat. We are David Wofford and Katie Noonan, co-chairs of the Rotary Nature Center Friends. And we're so happy that you can join us tonight.
As we begin our program, it is important for us to acknowledge that we are on stolen land, that Lake Merritt is part of Ohlone territory. We hear now from Corrina Gould, spokesperson for the Confederated Villages of Lisjan and co-founder of Segurate Land Trust.
Good afternoon, relatives. My name is Corrina Gould. I am the spokesperson for the Confederated Villages of Lisjan. We are here today at what most folks think of as Lake Merritt. We are in the territory of Huichun. Huichun is actually a territory that encompasses 6 Bay Area cities: Oakland, Berkeley, Alameda, Emeryville, Albany, and Piedmont. And so this is a place that my ancestors have been since the beginning of time. And this was a place of abundance. I'm so happy that people from all walks of life that now come into our territory can enjoy this beautiful place that my ancestors have enjoyed since the beginning of time. My relationship to the land that I have been born to, raising my children and grandchildren here, has been to tell the story, the truth of what happened on this land before other people came here. I'm hoping that as we begin to learn these lessons of fires in California, the pandemic that's happening, that human beings come back to living in reciprocity with the earth.
Thank you so much, Corrina, and welcome to all of our guests tonight. I'm Katie Noonan, co-chair of Rotary Nature Center Friends, and we're very excited to have you here today to have conversation, to hear Corrina's presentation. Usually at this point in the program, we like to share some of our stewardship and science activities we have done as Rotary Nature Center Friends in the past month. And there are a couple I'd like to share with you. It's been a very busy month. And so I'm going to share my screen. So we were very blessed to make a partnership with the Youth Employment Project in Oakland, and had students come out to help us with our marsh restoration project on the shores of Lake Merritt. And we had a lot of fun and involved the kids in learning about native plants and some of the uses that native people use them for and used them for in the past, and also to look at the condition of water quality in Lake Merritt, learning how to use real tools and interpret the results. Another connection we made this month was with with microscopy. We worked with Janai Southworth from the Greater Farallone's Marine Sanctuary, and we're able to do some plankton toes in the lake and look at and photograph the organisms that are living in the lake. So just recently, the community has noticed and been a bit alarmed by the red tide or the red water that is in Lake Merritt. And we were able to take a plankton toe and notice some of the little microorganisms that give it this color. They're called dinoflagellates. And actually, some of their tribe do produce toxins that cause shellfish poisoning, but not the ones that we sampled in our sample. This was a really fun thing to do with the students, something they are absolutely able to do, and a way that youth can participate in science and stewardship. So to summarize briefly, we'd like to give a shout out to all our community partners, to YEP, to New Voices Are Rising with the Rose Foundation. They're interns did wonderful work with us this month. To all the Adopt a Spot volunteers that came out on our third Saturday events, and to Janai, who's been very enthusiastic about showing students and adults and everybody how to look at the microorganisms living in Lake Merritt. So it's a whole new world, and we're really pleased that she's able to come out. And there are other St. Paul's. There are people I've left off this list, so we'll get back to them next time. But really appreciate all of you, especially the Exploratorium and just a bunch of people. So thank you. Okay, so at this point, we're going to introduce our special guest for tonight. And I'm going to I'm going to introduce first one of our board members, Betsy Schultz, who has known Corrina for a long time and is a retired teacher at the Oakland Street Academy. And so I thought she would be the most appropriate person to introduce Corrina tonight. So please go ahead, Betsy, and then we'll do the housekeeping real quickly after.
Okay.
Okay.
Right. So it's my honor to officially introduce our speaker, Corrina Gould. You've already heard a little bit about her in the introduction to the, but I've known Corrina for over 40 years. First as one of my students, later as a co-worker and a parent, both at the Street Academy, where we now both serve on the board of directors, and now very importantly, as a community activist dedicated to protecting sacred sites and reclaiming and preserving the ancestral lands of her people. I'm really pleased and proud to introduce Corrina Gould.
Thank you, Betsy.
And Corrina is muted.
Oh no. So while we get Corrina unmuted, I'd like to remind people about our practices for hearing our speakers. So we would encourage everyone to write your questions in the chat for Corrina, and but to stay muted during her formal presentation. At that point, everybody will be able to unmute, and we will have questions and answers and discussion. So everybody find their chat, and we're ready to get going, I think. Corrina, are you ready?
Thank you, Betsy, for the introduction. Thank you to the Nature Center for inviting me to be here in this circle with all of you guys today in our little square boxes. It's amazing that we're able to do this kind of work. And I think that was one of the good things about that came out of us being in pandemic, is that we are able to come together from all places around the world, even to be in spaces together. So I start out with saying Huichun-aka Corrina. That's the very first language of the East Bay, Chochenyo, and my great-grandfather Jose Guzman was one of the last speakers of that language. Behind me, you'll see a place today called Mount Diablo. And in our language, it is called Tushtak, and Tushtak is a place of our creation. And we have creation stories all over the world, and this happens to be ours. And so we are born of Tushtak, that is our mountain, and our waterway is Lisjan, and that is who we are named after. We are Lisjan people, but we are a confederation of people. And I'm going to do a share screen, so I'm not a talking head, and you guys can actually have visuals. And so we're going to talk about rematriation, protecting the sacred as Indigenous women's decolonial work. And it's important that we talk about where we are in this world and what's happening right now as we're dealing with fires and climate disaster and pandemics and all of these different things. And what does it look like to follow the sacred? Yeah, let's see what's going on. Why am I not changing? So the Confederated Villages of Lisjan is actually a territory that encompasses many different counties: Alameda, Contra Costa, San Joaquin, parts of Solano, and Napa. And we are a confederation of tribes that come from all of those places. We were our ancestors were taken out of these areas and enslaved at both Mission Dolores in San Francisco and Mission San Jose in Fremont. And so our tribe speaks on behalf of all of these territories and all of these counties at this time. We like to talk about this. I like to start off our talks with this quote from Rowan White. It says, "My body is a cartography of stories of ancestors asking not to be forgotten. We are not a conquered people." In the Bay Area, when you look around, you see buildings and you see streets and we see asphalt and concrete and all of these things. But sometimes we forget that underneath all of that, there's this landscape that has been here for thousands and thousands of years. And in that landscape, there's creeks that we don't see anymore because of the asphalt and the streets. There are beautiful places that my ancestors had caretaken for a while. But if we soften our eyes, we might still see those places underneath all of this asphalt. So we're asking that we're not forgotten. We're asking to remember what it is to be a part of that reciprocity of taking care of the waters and the lands that we're on still. I'd like to talk about this genocide, this 3 waves of genocide. And the reason for this is because people come to our territory from all over the world. And they may never have learned this, and even in school, if they went to school here in the Bay Area. Because when I went to school, we learned about the Bay Area in a much different way. And even my children, when they went to public school in Oakland, learned about our history in a much different way. You see, there was 3 waves of genocide that happened. And genocide is about trying to kill off an entire people or culture, a language, a way of being. When folks first got here, the missionaries got here from Spain, they had already used this tactic of missions in Mexico and Central America. So they knew that this particular tactic of holding down land would work. You see, they came here. The Spanish actually claimed California, the Bay Area, this area all the way down to Southern California, not by getting off of the land, off of their ships, but by going by the land. This man named Cabrillo was sailing down the coast, and he called dibs on the land for Spain and the crown. And we know that when I talk to young people, I said, you know what dibs is? You know, if we got one pink box and it has one donut in it, and you call dibs on it, then that's your donut, right? Well, the same thing happened. And they didn't come back for almost 200 years. But when they did come back, it was because they were afraid that the Russians were actually going to steal the land from them, because the Russians had already started fur trade with California Native people in the north. And so they decided to use these mission systems in order to hold down the land. There's a thing called the doctrine of discovery. And very shortly, the doctrine of discovery was a papal bull, a law that was passed by the Roman Catholic Church that basically said that people of color were not full humans, and that explorers or people that went to other lands could take that land by force, by the cross or by the sword. And so colonization across the world happened because of this papal bull. There were 21 missions that started at the very base of California and worked its way all the way up to a little bit past the Bay Area up in Solano. And those 21 missions lasted for 99 years. Not a very long time, but in that time, they were able to wipe out almost 80 to 90% of Native population. They were able to do that through forced labor or slavery, by bringing in diseases that our ancestors did not have immunity to. So we have survived many pandemics since the first contact of European people into our territories. And they also, there was starvation that happened. Even though our land was abundant, there was a time before colonization that there was no concept of hunger or homelessness here in the Bay Area. We have to wonder, what does it mean now when we look at, around even Oakland, and to see the thousands of people that are living without a roof over their head, without enough food or water? How have we come as a society farther along than our ancestors had prior to colonization? Colonization in California was much different than happened on the East Coast. We hear about all of the things that happened on the East Coast when the British were fighting the folks that first came to settle those lands. but 1776, at the same time that the Declaration of Independence was being signed on the East Coast, was just about the time that Spanish colonization happened here in California. Much different kind of colonization happened here. These missions were built not by the Spanish soldiers, but by my ancestors. My ancestors worked at Adobe and then became imprisoned at these places. And so what I call the first prison industrial complex of California, a place where we were forced to build our own prison systems and were not allowed to go away. Once we were baptized, we became the property of these missions. Then Mexico won its independence from Spain, and in that they received huge land grants. Some of the Mexican soldiers, and they created these ranchos. So my ancestors quite literally went from being slaves at the missions to being slaves at these ranchos. And so some of those ranchos that you might know of, Peralta was a huge landowner in the Bay Area. Bernal was another one, Vallejo. So there's all of these different names that we hear constantly while we're here in the Bay Area, not understanding sometimes where those came from. So this is the map of the El Rancho de San Antonio. This is the Peralta land grant. The Peralta land grant takes care of or encompasses all of Huichun, basically. And so it goes from the border of Oakland and San Leandro all the way to Albany. And in that land, my ancestors, you can even see right here in the middle of it where Lake Merritt is today. And so my ancestors took care of these lands. They actually created the adobe houses, the first adobe houses that the Peraltas lived in. Now there you can go and visit one of those Peralta houses that have been moved from actually Diamond Park area down to Coolidge Avenue. My ancestors created those adobe houses and actually lived there for about 8 years before the Peraltas came to take their land. And then my ancestors became quote unquote homeless and lived along the creek there while they worked for the Peraltas. In 1848, Mexico had a war with America, and American won that war, and the land was stolen for a third time, and this time by the United States. And instead of slavery, the first laws in California were extermination laws of California Native people. We hear about fourth grade history, you hear about my ancestors, and you hear about the missions. And sometimes for adults, you may have recreated a mission using sugar cubes or other kinds of materials in order to recreate the missions. And then we disappear from history. Like after fourth grade, we don't hear about Ohlone people anymore. And so that's what I call a continuous genocide of our people. It's a white paper genocide. We are written out of history, so there is no memory of us being here anymore. They used to use tule boats. They used to eat acorns. They used to go hunting, but we're still here. So there's no used to. It's a continuous genocide of our people by continuing to do that in history. Well, these laws that were created when the state of California we hear in fifth grade about this gold rush, right? The gold rush, thousands of people coming to California, San Francisco booming into this gigantic city all of a sudden. People are looking for gold, but not everyone could find gold. But you could find native villages and people that were living together, and you could hunt them down legally. $5 a head and 25 cents an ear. You could then gather up the children and take them into town, and you could sell them $300 for a little girl, $180 for a little boy. And so the disintegration of our tribal lifeways was even further happening when they created these laws. They also created vagrancy laws in the state of California. It made it illegal for a Native person to speak against a white man in a court of law. And so if there was a miner or there was a rancher or there was somebody that needed help in there, they could take a Native person off the street and before a justice of the peace, and they could say that they were vagrant, and the justice of the peace would say, You could have this person for 25 years as long as you could feed and clothe them. And so chattel slavery was alive and well, even though the state of California was created as a free state. And so our ancestors were running continuously from genocide. And so many of our people, the way that they survived, because they had learned Spanish first in the missions, and then while they were working on the ranches, was to pretend that they were Mexican in order to survive, so that they would not be hunted down. Ohlone people is a generic term. Ohlone is a generic term. We were first called Costanoan by the Spaniards. Costanoans, because they didn't know any better at first. They said these people all kind of look alike. They kind of all dress alike. They eat the same kinds of foods. And they live along the coast. And so we're going to call them Costanos or Costanoans. And then during the 1960s, when in the Bay Area, there was this uprising of people and the Black Panther movement and the American Indian movement and the Brown Berets and the Ohlone peoples decided, we want to give ourselves a different name. We don't want to be Costanoans anymore. And so they took the word Ohlone out of a Southern Territory area of a village called Ohlone. And so we began to call ourselves this as a self-determination, as a way of standing in our sovereignty, as a way of us being able to say who we are. But actually, we're not all the same. There's actually 8 different languages with 8 different creation stories and many villages within one language group. And so today in the East Bay, we sit inside this territory that spoke Chochenyo, but there was never one overarching tribe, even within the language groups. But I like to explain to city council people, because they can't get it, is that if you look at Alameda County, we all speak the same language, but each city has its own municipalities, its own laws, its own ways of doing things. And so the same was true with Native people. In California, there were over 174 different languages spoken here. It was the most populous language place in the world at the time. And so we know that there has always been multiple tribes here, and today there still are multiple tribes here. After all of the stuff that we talked about running from the genocide that was happening, there were still more things that continued to happen. There were laws that were created to assimilate Native people, and we were forced into boarding schools. My auntie and uncle went to a boarding school called Chemawa Boarding School in Oregon. They were taken from their families when they were very young. Many different Native people were taken from their families all over the country and put into these Indian training schools, these places that taught you how to read and write, maybe, also to forget your language and your culture. It was not a place where you were going into higher education, but how to work inside of factories and how to do menial work or to work in families' homes. About 5 years ago, I sat in my auntie's house, and she lives on 40th Avenue in Oakland. And she's the matriarch of our tribe. And she told this story to us while we're sitting in her living room. And my cousins who were there had never heard this story before. She talked about going to boarding school. And at that time, at boarding schools, you went into Indian foster care right afterwards, which is not the kind of foster care that we talk about today. Foster care today, we hope that when young people go and stay at foster homes, that they are going to be able to be reunited with their families of origin. These foster care homes for Indians were really workhouses. So my auntie talked about her placement. Her placement was with this nice white family in San Leandro. And she said, oh yeah, I cooked for them and I cleaned for them and I washed their clothes and took care of their children. And they were so nice, they wanted to send me to school. This was in San Leandro. And the San Leandro school district said no, she couldn't go to school because she was too dark. I figured that this happened right around 1950. And so it was not that long ago that that our families were still forced not to be treated as full human beings. My auntie married early at the age of about 15 or 16 years old and raised her children while she was a waitress at the Acapulco restaurant in Alameda. And so these stories of pain still persist inside of our own families. But we survived all of those things. We survived by being able to begin to talk about those stories and to stand up straight and to save and protect our sacred sites in our Bay Area, the places that we have been connected to since the beginning of time. And we reorganized ourselves as the Confederated Villages of Lisjan. Many tribes are reorganizing themselves in order for us to have a voice in the State Department, even though we're not federally recognized. And so, what does it mean to not be federally recognized? How is it that a government that comes in as a brand new government decide who is Indian and who is not Indian? Like anybody can come here from any other country and say, I'm Irish, I'm Italian, I'm Moroccan, and they are just taken as face value. That's what they are. But in order to be recognized by the federal government, you have to prove many different things. The United States government got rid of many tribes illegally because they did not want to have to take care of them. There's a relationship between tribes and the United States government. It's a government-to-government relationship. We don't talk about that so much in school, and so people don't understand that. Why don't you get federally recognized? Do you get a check every month? All of these questions come up. And do you have a casino? Well, we don't have a casino. We don't get money from the federal government, but we are able to work within the state, the planning departments of every city, because there was laws that were created for non-federally recognized tribes in the state of California. Take a deep breath. That's a lot of information I'm trying to drop on your head, and a lot of people didn't know any of this stuff. So this is a map. This is a map of shell mounds that was created in 1909 by a man named Nels Nelson. And Nels Nelson worked for UC Berkeley. And UC Berkeley's archaeology department really made a niche in archaeology by destroying our sacred sites and burial places in the Bay Area. In 1909, Nels Nelson knew that there was so much development happening in the Bay Area that these shell mounds were going to be destroyed. And so he went around the Bay Area and found 425 of them that ring the Bay. Over 100 years ago, this man knew that this was going to happen. And I always have this idea that there was particular people a long time ago, people that recorded my great-grandfather singing songs and doing language. This guy, Nels Nelson, that put all of these sacred sites on a map so that in my lifetime and in my children's lifetime, we could re-find these places that are now underneath cements and buildings and schools and bars. And so we started doing this work because you may have learned about Ohlone in school. You may have had a little bit of history about us, but nobody ever talked about shell mounds. And it wasn't until about 25 plus years ago that my friend Janella LaRose and I started doing work around shell mounds. There was this time that many of you guys might remember. There was a time around 1999 when there was a wave of gentrification that happened, right? Around 1999, this miracle thing happened. The internet was created. This internet now allows us to talk to each other right now in real time. But it was a new thing back then around the late 1990s. And people were making so much money that they were outbidding each other for houses and apartments. And it caused a wave of people to move out of the Bay Area. And so like we're seeing with the cost of living happening here in the Bay Area and the cost of housing going up, the same thing happened then. And it moved people out. But while that was going on, our shell mounds started to reveal themselves and lots of developments that were happening around the Bay Area, including the Emeryville shell mound, the largest of 425 shell mounds that ring the Bay Area. It was a funerary complex. It was over 3 stories high and 3.5 football fields in diameter. It actually was like a hand with one large one and small ones coming off of it. And my ancestors had buried our people there for thousands of years. And why did they call them shell mounds? Well, shell, we ate a lot of shellfish, but it wasn't like we threw our ancestors in a dump or a garbage heap. They were placed there specifically. Their heads were aligned to the east, where their feet went to the west. And so there was a particular way that people were buried. We covered in soil and stone and a layer of shell. And shell we actually used as a currency, a way for us to trade with people. And so it was really an honor to put our ancestors down into the ground with this shell. The Emeryville Shell Mound was saved by having a dance pavilion put on top of it for many years. And then Prohibition happened and the dance pavilion went away, and factories were put there. And people that lived in the Bay Area for a long time, when you would come down the 880 corridor, you would see all of those old rickety buildings that were there for many years, where the Bay Street Mall now sits. They poisoned what was left underneath there, because whatever's on top, when they take it down, there are many layers, sometimes 10 to 20 feet of more ancestors underneath the ground. But at the time, there were no EPA laws, and there were people dropping arsenic and other kinds of poisons into the ground. And so that every time it would rain, all of that toxins would go into Temescal Creek and out into the bay, and you could see the plume. The city of Emeryville was broke, but they received some money from the federal government to clean up this toxic waste dump. And in cleaning it up, decided to create the Bay Street Mall. And so although our ancestors, many of them were removed out of the toxic sludge, many of them still remain there. And so on the corner of Shellmound Street and Ohlone Way, we hold yearly gatherings where hundreds of people show up to remind the public that this is still a sacred site, a place where our ancestors lie and have been there for thousands of years. And so from noon to 3 o'clock on the day after Thanksgiving, the biggest shopping day of the year, we've gathered there for 20 years now, except during the pandemic, when it has not been okay for people to come out and be together. But people show up and give information to shoppers that didn't know this about this place and what it still holds for us. We went on to protect other sacred sites, a sacred site in Vallejo, California. We took over that site for 109 days, for 4.5 months, when the city of Vallejo filed bankruptcy in 2011. For 11.5 years, my good friend Wounded Knee de Ocampo, a Miwok man who lived in Vallejo and grew up there, knew that there was 2 shell mounds along the Carquinez Strait in a place now called Glen Cove Park. Our ancestors were there for thousands of years. It was one of the last strongholds in Solano that my ancestors lived, along the Carquinez Strait. It's a place where we have had ceremony for our salmon for thousands of years, and have brought that back over the last 10 years, working with the Winnemem-Wintu tribe. The Carquinez Strait holds a special place, not just for Ohlone people, but for everybody that lives along the Bay Area. It's a place where we had salmon runs. One of the soldiers wrote about a salmon run when they were chasing my ancestors during the mission period. And they wrote inside their diary that they had lost my ancestors, but when they got to the strait, that there was a salmon run happening, and that there were so many salmons that were going through that you could practically walk to the other side on their backs. Imagine having that much salmon. Imagine these salmon that have this beautiful way of being in the world. For the Winnemem, they believe that salmon gave them their voice. And so it's theirs to their responsibility to protect the salmon. But salmon are magical fish, and I love to eat them, and many people do. But they're these amazing fish that are born up in the mountains at the top of rivers, and they come down to our delta, the lungs of this side of the world, and they change from being freshwater fish to saltwater fish. And they do that, and then they come down our Carquinez Strait and out to our bay, and they go out to our ocean through what is called our Western Gate, where this Golden Gate Bridge is, and they turn south before they go north. And when they go south, they go to feed the whales that have been birthing their little babies. And those that are left over go up north, and they're out in the ocean for up to 4 years. And then something tells them to come home. And as they come home, they go back through our bay and up our strait into the delta, and they hang out there and they transform from saltwater fish back to freshwater fish. And as they go up their rivers, not any river, only the river they were born to, they move their bodies in a way that they clean the river with their bodies and the rocks. Some of them die along the way, and their body gives nutrients to the trees and the plants that are growing there. They feed bear and other animals, only giving of themselves. And so it's important for us to ensure that there's water that's there for them, that they're able to come back, because human beings are only as healthy as our rivers and our salmon. And so I encourage you guys to learn about salmon. We stood up against genocide again when in 2015, Huichun-aka was being canonized. He was becoming a saint. And California Native people and Native people across the world stood up against this. The Catholic Church making this person who brought genocide to our town or to our lands. Huichun-aka built the first 9 of the 21 missions, including Mission San Jose and Mission Dolores in San Francisco. And we fought against this for while this was going on, and we lost. The Catholic Church created Huichun-aka as a saint, and we liken him to Hitler. Have been Jewish people pray for a miracle to Hitler, just as we would be praying to Huichun-aka for miracles to happen. The problem is that today we still have young people that are fighting federal felonies in the court of law in Marin right now, because a few years ago they toppled they're accused of toppling a Huichun-aka statue, and the Archbishop is charging them with, or asking them to be charged with felonies. They did this on Indigenous Peoples Day 3 years ago, and they're still in court. It's amazing that we cannot still have a voice, and these young people cannot have a voice, or to come to a realization to sit down together to talk about the pain that people have experienced over the years because of the Catholic Church. The West Berkeley Shell Mound is the oldest of all 425 shell mounds. We have used this shell mound at 1900 4th Street as a place to gather from people from all over the world. We have connected our sacred site to the land issues and the sacred sites that are being destroyed or are in danger of being destroyed all over the world. People in Palestine and people that are standing up to save their sacred site, Mauna Kea in Hawaii. We have stood together both day and night for almost 6 years now. You see, this West Berkeley Shell Mound looks like a parking lot today. It's across from Spanger's Grotto, which many people may have eaten at. I ate there before. It had great crab cakes I loved. But this parking lot has virtually been untouched except to be flattened out into a parking lot. It has not been developed. And we know, not just us, but people all over the country that are Native know that when a land stands virtually untouched, that there's something special about it. This land used to have Strawberry Creek that ran through it, all the way from University of California, Berkeley, down the University Avenue and through this land. Strawberry Creek ran. We want to save it for our ancestors. We've invited people from all over the world to pray with us, from all walks of life, people from the Amazon and people from Japan and Korea and from Mexico have all danced and sang and prayed there. Jews and Palestinians and Christian people have all come to pray there and to put down beautiful murals and to stand in solidarity with us to save this sacred site. Two-Spirit relatives have gone through the fences, and while we've been in court, they put a 6-foot fence with barbed wire around it a couple of years ago, locking us out of our site, our sacred site. We've never been locked out of it before. And we encourage people to go and put ribbons and prayers and messages of love on this sacred place. And they did. We've been praying for the protection of our sacred sites with people from all over the world. And we invite people to go there and to lay down your own prayers and to your own messages on that fence, to let the developers know that we don't need big story condominiums there, but that we need a place for people to come from all walks of life to gather and to learn about the history that's not told anywhere. Ohlone people have been here since the beginning of time, but basically find ourselves homeless in our own homeland. We don't own very much land in our territory up until 2 years ago. Because of the land trust, we owned nothing. We talk about rematriation, and we use this. This is the closest we can come to a definition that was written by Stephen Newcomb. It says, rematriation is to restore a living culture to its rightful place on Mother Earth, or to restore a people to a spiritual way of life and sacred relationship with their ancestral lands without external interference. As a concept, rematriation acknowledges that our ancestors lived in spiritual relationship with our lands for thousands of years, and that we have a sacred duty to maintain that relationship for the benefit of our future generations. Rematriation is about reconnecting with our land and our culture and our ways of life. But we don't do that by ourselves. We do that with everybody that now lives in our territory. If people live here, then it is all of our responsibilities to make sure that our waterways are kept clean and are reopened up our creeks, that we have good soil to grow food in for the next 7 generations, that our airs are kept clean for the next 7 generations. And through all of this work that we decided to create the Segorite Land Trust, the first urban Indigenous women-led land trust in the country, a place where we understand that other Indigenous tribes have come to live in our territory, that there needs to be a place for us to reconnect and to do this work. But it was important for us to do a Indigenous women's land trust. After the takeover in Segorite, which is the name of our village up on the Carquina Strait, I was invited to a land trust meeting. My good friend Beth Rose Middleton, who is a professor at UC Davis, invited me to an Indigenous land trust meeting. I had no idea what a land trust was at the time, but I went because I understood that she wanted me to do something. And I found that there was a handful of Indigenous land trusts in the country, and they were buying back their sacred sites. They were getting leases on an acre of land to tell their story. They were re-engaging in cultural revitalization and was sharing their history on lands that they have reclaimed. And I brought that idea back to my friend Janella Rose, who I've been working with for 30 years. And we said, yeah, we need to do this. But when I was at that meeting, almost all the land trusts were run by men. And so I asked my good friend Dune Lankart, I was like, is this a boys club? And Dune, who was an Alaskan Native man who saved 140,000 acres of his tribal territory after Exxon Valdez spill, he said, yeah, he laughed and he said, but not just Native land trusts, all land trusts. And as we began to ruminate about what does that mean? When we look around the world and we say, where are we at right now? And who has been in charge of land? We understand that men have been in charge of land, and we are in a crisis right now. And that it is time for women to stand up in our own sovereignty and take back our power. And that doesn't mean leaving our men behind, but it means that during this time of colonization, we've lost our way, and that it's time for us to figure out what that way is. And we need to have that voice again. In our territory, women were the leaders and men had their own responsibilities, but we've been taken away from that kind of world again. Now. And so now we need to figure out, how do we go back? How do we begin to trust that? And especially when we look at what's happening today, when we're looking at women's rights being taken away by the government again. As we're beginning to look at what is happening today to women, we must look at what has happened in the past and how we don't go backwards to ensure that we have futures. This piece of land is the first land given back to our people in 250 years. It's on 105th Avenue.
where it on a very small piece of land run by a group called Planting Justice. And Planting Justice is a nonprofit nursery, organic nursery that employs formerly incarcerated men and women and people that live in the neighborhood. And they went to Standing Rock in 2016. And you guys can look that up if you don't know what it is. But they were moved by what was happening there. And they were so moved, they asked the indigenous people what they should do when they came home. And they told them they should work with the First Nation peoples on whose land they're on. And so they took that to heart, and we had a conversation underneath this California walnut tree one summer. And they said that they wanted to give us back this land. And we were, Janella and I were amazed and shocked, and I am still moved to tears about this land, because I believe that our ancestors were giving us messages. This culverted waterway down there is the Lisjan waterway, where we're named after. The freeway in the background is on fill. And so we always created our villages where fresh water met salt water. And so it would have been a marsh there at one time. And we know that one of our shell mounds is underneath that freeway about a block away. And so this is quite literally either on a village site or very close to a village site that our ancestors had lived for thousands of years. We said, yes, we would take that land on a couple of conditions. We would pay Janella's salary to be there full time to clean it up because it was a mess. It didn't look like this. And to make relationships with those men and women that worked at Planting Justice, because how weird would it be not to create relationships with people that were taking care of that land? And we created the first arbor there in 250 years, a spiritual place where we gather, where we have ceremonies, where we're able to bring people together for good and bad. This arbor was created by actually taking down 27 redwood trees in Sonoma County. About 10 of us went up there, not knowing how to cut down trees, not knowing anything about it. There was a young man that worked at Planting Justice, and when he was in San Quentin, he worked on the fires, and he knew how to talk to trees, and he became our lead. And we went up there one weekend, and we were able to cut down these trees on someone's private property. And we thought, oh, well, we're going to put this arbor up in a month. And those trees kicked our butt for a year. And we moved those trees, and we skinned those trees with hundreds of people helping us. We regraded the land, and we sanded them down. And 3 years ago, on the weekend of Cinco de Mayo, we put this arbor up. We started hundreds of tobacco plants and white sage plants to give away so we could dance this arbor in. And then COVID happened, and we weren't able to do it. But we have had people come and dance and pray at this place. We've had fires for people that have passed away. My daughter was married in this arbor during COVID. My grandchildren asked for their birthday parties to be here. It has become a place of sanctuary for us. We had one young man who was coming out of San Quentin ask for permission to come and lay prayers there before he went home to his reservation. And so as people come from different places to come and visit us, they get to see this place that is a very oddly against this freeway and homeless encampment in the back, but it's a place of solace. And this is the women's log that is going up. We're restoring our language and our culture, working with our elders and youth together, bringing back language so that the lands and the waters can hear the language that was created here, that it yearns to hear, that had been here for thousands of years before. I heard that one time that there's over 70 different languages spoken just in Oakland. And one of them is not Chochenyo. And so we're trying to bring that back. We will be creating the first Ohlone Chochenyo Language Institute here in Oakland, hopefully in the next year or so. We invite people from all walks of life to come and help us to care for the land, to re-engage in the land. It may be a book that you may have read called Braiding Sweetgrass. And in that book, they talk about, Robin Kimmerer talks about how when people re-engage with the land, that once their hands are in the ground and they're doing that work, that people, human beings, begin to hum or sing. It's an automatic response from people that we need to, even though we're in urban areas, re-engage with the lands that we're on. We've worked with the city to recognize Ohlone territory. The cities of Berkeley they were the first ones to change their name, saying welcome to Berkeley, Ohlone territory. We put in also a street mural that at the same time that Black Lives Matters murals were going up all over the country. The city of Berkeley approved that and also said that we must also remember that we're on Ohlone territory, and let us put that one up as well. We've worked with the city of Richmond to create a park that that the tribe and the Segorite Land Trust now tends to and is able to grow medicinal plants that we're able to harvest and have a good relationship. And so I suggest you go and see this wonderful park. We've worked with the city of Alameda to change a park from Andrew Jackson Park to Chochenyo Park, and working with the city of Alameda to do other things. They were the first city to pay She'umi in the Bay Area. Worked with the city of Albany to create our flag and our flag flies over the city of Albany. They have also recently changed the signs going into their city and are the second city to pay She'umi. This is a small picture of our tribe with our tribal matriarch, Reina, my auntie. There's many different generations. There's over 200 of us that are Lisjan people that are working to preserve and protect the sacredness of our land and growing up our children and our grandchildren here. And we invite all of you to continue to do that work, just like the work we saw that Katie put up with the young people engaging and at Lake Merritt. We can't do this alone. We need everyone's help to do this kind of work to make sure that the next 7 generations have all of the good things we want for them.
Thank you, Corrina. What a powerful presentation. I want to thank you, and we're so proud that you have been able to come and speak to us tonight. Perhaps maybe we should continue to let Corrina have a break, and let's all go into gallery mode and unmute and clap our hands. Maybe we could do that. Okay, 1, 2, 3. Everybody, let's all say thank you.
Oh, I still have.
A wonderful presentation. Thank you. Okay, so we do have
This guy's head just disappeared under the bridge.
yes. We have recorded, and we'll be sharing the recording with all of you and have it on our playlist. So let's take 1 or 2 questions. Betsy, could you forward us maybe 1 or 2 questions from chat?
Okay. There was a question about how far do the shell mounds extend beneath the concrete and asphalt surfaces?
Yeah, so many of them go, like I said, about 10 to 20 feet below the surface. And the reason some people ask why, right? But because they're so heavy, so people were buried there for hundreds or thousands of years. And so it began to sink. And so, that's why they're there. They're just really heavy.
There's another question. Were the ancient Lisjan people distinct from Huichun-Ohlone people?
Yeah, so we take our name from Lisjan because it's our waterway. And so Huichun is a territory. And so it encompasses Huichun as well. And so we're named after the way we're named after the waterway that we are born to. And so San Leandro, San Lorenzo creeks are our main sources of water from our territories, but because our territories because the Lisjan people were brought in. We're a mixture of Ohlone and Bay Miwok, Plains Miwok, Delta Yokut, and Patwin or Wapo.
Nadia has her hand up. Nadia, can you unmute?
Yes, can you hear me?
Yes.
Oh, great. Well, Corrina, thank you so much for this talk. I myself am Palestinian, and so I can I just find it ironic that my family was kicked off of our ancestral land to come live on your ancestral land, and so I want to thank you and your people. But my question is different. I think I don't need to tell you that the Catholic Pope just did his quote unquote penitential pilgrimage to Canada and to give his formal apology to Indigenous First Nations people there. And so my question to you is, what is your personal feeling about the role of formal apologies and how do they land?
Thank you, Nadia, so much for that question. I believe that many of us want the Pope to rescind the doctrine of discovery, that that the church really created that and created this havoc across the world by using that law to enslave and to steal the lands of Indigenous people all over the place. I think that also an apology doesn't mean anything without there being action behind it. And so I think that, you can apologize many times. He went down to South America and he apologized to the Indigenous people in South America, but he still made Junipero Serra a saint. He can apologize for the horrific things that happened at the boarding schools, but that doesn't help the Indigenous people right now whose culture was stolen. And I think that there needs to be some real action behind it. The Catholic Church owns thousands of acres of land. Return that land back to the Indigenous people. Begin to figure out how do we work together to really make a healing. One person's apology for an organization that has destroyed many people throughout the world is not going to make things right.
So we want to thank everyone for coming and hope to see you again in September. We have another great show coming your way. The Lakeside chats are rebroadcast on the City of Oakland KTOP TV Channel 10 on Sundays from 6 to 7 p.m. And you can check their listings there. This particular show will be available probably towards the end of the month. We would like to invite everyone to our upcoming event at Lake Merritt on August 28th, where we're going to explore a whole bunch of connections that we all have to Lake Merritt and the land. We have a wish list for that. If anyone has access or knows where we can get some sandwich boards for our event, the kind of board stands that one can put posters. There are student posters, science posters, and art posters we want to share. And would just in general like to help at this event, please give me an email at ktnoon@aol.com. Coming up on August 23rd, we will hold our traditional Adopt a Spot Workday. We're going to be working both at the Rotary Nature Center grounds and in Lakeside Park, and also at the Sailboat House Marsh close by. We'll meet up at the totem pole and then go on from there. We want to thank Rob Lamone, our producer. David Wofford and I are the co-chairs. We want to give special thanks to Kirsten, who's been doing some wonderful artwork for us, and especially in our upcoming event. We want to thank all of our generous donors who have sent in their donations to help keep us going and providing our programs. If you enjoy what we were doing, chats, the programs with young people and others at the lake, please go to our website and you can make a donation there if you choose. Here's our website. That's what it looks like. And there's the donation button. So that brings us to the end of my closing slides. I want to thank everyone. We hope to see you again next month when we are going to host Damon Ty, who will be talking about the bioluminescence phenomenon in Lake Merritt. So it should be a really great program too. And so we'll be sending out that registration and information very soon, as well as a post Lakeside Chat email for Corrina's talk, in which we'll provide links and answers to questions that we may not get to in the next few minutes that we have together. So at this point, I would like to say goodbye to everyone who has to leave. At this point, we're really thankful that you were able to stay with us and join this incredible talk with Corrina. And I would like to then open up the floor again for conversation and questions and answers.
Katie, at this
Yes.
point, I'd like to say hello.
Hi,
and
David.
start it off. Hello.
Go for it, David. Glad to see you here.
And,
I know you've been here for most of the program. Yeah, great to see
well,
you.
absolutely, absolutely. And, I want to thank Corrina Gould for joining us this evening. For our 21st, Corrina, I'm David Wofford, co-chair with Katie of the Rotary Nature Center Friends, and this is our 21st Rotary Nature Center Friends Lakeside Chat. And I'm so thankful that we've been able, for all of our events, all 21 of them, feature a land acknowledgement and your words in the beginning of our program. It has made our program so much richer and powerful, and a wonderful way for us to bring it. And then tonight, to have you as our featured guest, it's been wow. I'm almost speechless because you carried us so well and you shared so much information. And I've spent the last, I believe it's been 6 years now, being trained by the wonderful institution of the Oakland Museum of California to be a guide in early California history. And I've spent 6 years with, and they've been so wonderful to provide such intensive training about the European discovery of the area, about the Mission District, about the Mexican period, the Californios and the United States and the gold rush. And yet, and in just 1 hour, you carried and communicated so much that I have struggled to learn and communicate with those fourth graders that they have trained me to meet with these last several years that come in to hear these things. And so I'm just filled with knowledge and inspiration and hopefulness that that you can continue your work, that I can grow in my work, and that we can be a part of a world of coming into understanding about who we are. So I had to say that before I could get into to anything else that your talk brought up. But also, Katie, I want to thank you for putting together such a wonderful program again, and for all of your hard work to make this thing continue to happen. Thank you all for being here. And then to your talk specifically, there were a couple of things. As an African American and a native Oaklander, I grew up with the perspective in my generation that Oakland, I think me and my family and my community considered Oakland Black, and we kind of thought it belonged to us. We were the descendants of slaves and stuff. We didn't know a lot about the world, but we really did. And now, some 20, 30 years later, when the 46% population that we once thought was universal and 100% it's shrunk down to 22%. I use the term shrunk, but there are factors that to my mind are similar to some of the things you talked about earlier in terms of land use and land development and mission systems and others in terms of affecting a group of people living in a specific area. So what I'm trying to get to is just really, I guess I want to apologize for thinking it was all a black thing and not being able to be aware that but I don't want to just apologize about it. I want to just talk about how here in Oakland, this sort of thing can happen and how we can miss each other and what the work is about in terms of trying to share understanding with one another, because it didn't just happen to black people. I know a number of people, other people here in Oakland who frankly feel oppressed and feel like they got a claim to the experience of being here and don't really maybe have a lot of space for some of the things that we talked about here tonight. So they're here too. And it's a human challenge to recognize some of these things, and but the level of articulation and clarity I'm sorry, that you brought to this tonight, it was so beautiful. I've never heard anything like it. For my purposes here locally specifically. So I just want to thank you again, and I'll let anybody else who have any questions step in now.
Thank you so much, David. I look forward to working with you.
Thank you. Please raise your hand if you have a question. And I had a rather, I want to tell you too, Corrina, it was just so moving and such a window into possibility that you're opening for people. It's just pretty spectacular. I had a question, just a minor question earlier on about the position, because we're associated with Lake Merritt. Was there a word for this area of the shoreline, which is a little bit different from the general shoreline of the coast? And did Lake Merritt ever have any significance other than as a general waterway in Ohlone culture?
So it was really populated around Lake Merritt, where Lakeview Library was a village site. And on First Ave, underneath the street and underneath the apartment building there along the lake was a shell mound where the First Congregational Church is. There's a creek that ran there and it goes along the Veterans Building there. And so, you guys, if you guys are from Oakland, you'll know that there is the new cathedral, and then across from there is the Community Bank of the Bay. Behind the Community Bank of the Bay, and in this new development that's right across the street from the First Congregational Church, catty corner to Whole Foods, there was a huge shell mound there as well. And so our ancestors had villages and shell mounds all along the bay there. It was full of tule. And so we would use the tule to create our houses and our boats. It was a great place to fish. And I don't know how many of you guys were here in the Bay Area, 30, 40 years ago. There was tule fog, if you guys remember that. And it would just get fogged out here in Oakland, even all the way up into the hills. When I was a kid, I went to John Sweat. I went to a lot of different schools. We moved a lot. But that was one of the elementary schools that I went to. And I remember that you couldn't even see the house next door to you as you were walking to school, right? And we don't see that anymore. And it's because of the development and taking out the tule and the way we have changed the environment so much that we don't realize that that's also why we have this extreme heat now, right? Why we have this climate disaster is because of the extreme building and the covering up of these waterways and stuff. And so also Lake Merritt used to be a sewage dump, right? When Oakland used to only be on the other side of the lake. And I think people that live in Oakland don't even realize that, right? That this side of the lake, oh, I'm sorry, I'm saying this side. I live in Sobrani Park, but anything on the other side of the lake, right, on the east side of the lake was Brooklyn, right? It was a whole different place. And so all under West Oakland, in many of the different neighborhoods, there were shell mounds as well. So it's changed a lot, and we don't have a name yet. My daughter, Deja, who Betsy also knows, is our language carrier for our tribe, is renaming different places and our waterways, and we're looking at them and hoping to get people to adopt those names in some kind of way. But it's a work in progress. So that's what I'll say about that.
Janice, you have a question?
Unmute, please.
Unmute.
You're muted, Janice.
Yeah, okay. Corrina, I just want to thank you. The presentation was just wonderful. It just teaches us how important it is to teach history. Because, you know, I've been to Emeryville. I passed that street called Shelmon, and I never even looked up to see, well, what does Shelmon mean? You know, I've been to the Apartheid Museum in South Africa. I've been to the Holocaust Museum in Washington, D.C. And, you know, it's almost like there should be some kind of edifice that we can get all this knowledge from. But of course, it's being done. I think it needs to be done in the way that your culture wants it done, so that when we go, we are actually experiencing it. But I took 4 pages of notes, and I almost feel like you could do a class for college university students or 12th graders or something, so that when they leave the public school system, they have an understanding of the ground that they're walking on and what they're doing here. And I was thinking about this ecology class that I took at Holy Names, like almost like 30 or 40 years ago. And it's almost like we all need to have that ecology class that puts in what Native people, Indigenous people have done, because that's really crucial. And then since I'm dual citizenship in my other place is Canada, you know, when the Pope went there this last week or whatever, and he went to 3 places, and I was thinking, well, you said you're sorry, so what comes next? So you're right. It's not about just saying you're sorry. What are you doing? And that can be done. It's not, you know. So thank you, Corrina, for your knowledge.
Thank you, Janice. I really love the idea, because there is no one place in the Bay Area that talks about our history. And I put inside of the chat, shellmound.org is a website about the West Berkeley Shell Mound and our dream of what that could be if we're able to get that land taken off of the speculative market. And so we're looking for people in the Bay Area to help us really push the city council in Berkeley to continue to be on our side, to do everything in their power in order to protect that sacred site. And wouldn't it be wonderful if every 4th grader got to go to this vision that we have? And so please look at the website and help us out if you can with that. That's a different work than I do than the land trust.
Yes, thank you. Those comments bring up something for me. But before I get to that, I wanted to share tonight that there's a new cafe opening called the Ohlone Cafe. It's been since 2018 a pop-up located in Berkeley, and now it's going to have an official official location in the Herbst Theater on the UC campus, opening August 22nd. And it's a group of people, and they've been doing this for a few years. I have not been, but I've heard about it. I'm looking forward to going. And you go and they feature meals prepared with all native foods and plants and things that would have been available and would have been used by Ohlone people, or the people that were living here at that time. Back to what Miss Janice and Corrina were just speaking on. I wanted to press you, if you will, those of you who are still here. I live next to Lake Merritt now, and I'm the co-chair of the Nature Center and activist in other ways. And I've been asked to, as a community member, to support a local non-profit housing developer trying to address affordability issues. The name of the group is Ebalsi, and they've got this land here on East 12th and 2nd Avenue that sits right on Lake Merritt. And the city council has recently approved their jurisdiction over the development of a portion of the land, and they've got at least $22 million lined up from the state, and they're working to put together the other packaging. They're asking me and other community members, all of you included, to join in and participate in a community process of what happens there. And I have come to the decision that they've got the skills around financing and architectural design and even environmental impact reports, because they've done that an awful lot more than I have. And I'm pressing them to think beyond the box and think, well, if we can secure this project, it's going to be almost 300 units of, the word they use is very affordable, not just affordable, but very affordable housing, and not just a portion of it, but all 300 units. And but my push is, how do we break the mold? This is a housing, public housing, if you will, being built on the first wildlife refuge in the Lake Merritt. I'm holding up that end, but we also know it's being built upon unceded lands. And how can we build a project that incorporates all of that? In other words, I'm brainstorming here. I'm saying if we could pull in the from across the Bay Area, all the progressive thinking. I mean, so for example, what if every time you use a faucet, somehow or another, the act of using the faucet connects you to where that water comes from? In this case, that would be the Pardee Reservoir, the McQualamy River, and the McQualamy Aqueduct. And I don't know what that would look like, but what if I was aware of that every time I use the toilet or the kitchen sink, or reminded of it, or just an environment where somehow, what if on the application process, by the time I'm done with the application to be a tenant in this unit, I fully understand that it's on a Ohlone unceded land. I'm going to stop right there, because the idea is to just really open it up and get in there and try to make the things that Ms. Janice was just talking about that could happen if Corrina could be in front of graduate classes and college classes, and the thing that could happen if what Corrina was just talking about could be made available to 4th graders. But we got to get it out of the classrooms, because, well, I've been doing it in the classrooms with the museums, and it's been an uphill battle. And I just like to see it more integrated throughout our society. And I want to start it right here and right now on and in that project or wherever else I can. And so Corrina and anyone else, we'll be around. And if any ideas come up in that regard, you know how to find us and make contact.
Thanks, David. I see some hands up too, and I want to let them have. I just like to say that we're hoping to make this program and others that we have been available to schools as something that teachers would be able to use. You know, a rich lecture like this would be something that the average teacher would not be able to put together necessarily themselves. And Corrina can't go into every classroom, but it's really a great presentation. I'm also curious about how Corrina would approach some projects such as the one David discusses. I don't know if you have time to go into that here. I'm curious. And then Betsy has her hand raised, so maybe I should see to Betsy first. Betsy, why don't you go ahead first?
I just wanted to ask Corrina to explain just a little bit about the concept of Shumi, and maybe put the link for Shumi.
Yeah, thank you so much, Betsy.
I just want to say we need to get the city of Oakland to do some Shumi.
I am with you on that, David. Let's push the city of Oakland to pay Shumi. City of Alameda and the city of Albany have already done so. We are working with the city of Oakland to do something really exciting later on this year. So you'll hear about that. It's under wraps for at least another month, but that'll be out there pretty soon. We are Shumi is a is a gift in our language. And we called it land tax because people identify with what that means. We hate the word tax, but we all do, right? I just got something from the tax board today, so I really hate it, but we understand what that means. And the land trust really runs on the generous donations of people, individuals that live and work and play in our territory. And there's an opportunity on our website, the Segurite Land Trust website, where you could actually plug in some numbers, whether you're a renter or owner, and it gives you a suggested annual donation. Some people are sustaining donors, and so we've been really blessed that we're able to work and have and employ Indigenous young people to work on the land sites that we're caretaking right now. And so I will put that in the website. So thank you so much. It was actually the idea of the 7th Generation Fund up in Northern California. When the Huichun tribe had an island returned to them, they asked permission to create something like this. And when we dropped our website, we asked them for permission to use that. And since then, other places are doing it. There's a Duwamish Real Rent, and there is a Matahatta Fund in New York. People are going to pick it up maybe in Tongaland in LA. And so it's a really great and easy way to support our organization and the work that we're doing. And let me...
I like the comment in the can Shumi be made a condition for any new development? That would be great.
That's a wonderful idea. We're working with a realtor to see if they could add that onto houses, a small percentage to houses that are being sold in the Bay Area. We're working with other people to try to figure out how do we make this more inclusive in different kinds of ways. And so we are always up to listening to new ideas and working in collaboration with folks to see how we can get it done. And so thank you for that idea.
I'm not against the idea, but I'm just curious because, we've been currently engaged in a process of trying to articulate the need for what we call a community benefits package for developments in Oakland. And some of us would like to see it happen for all developments, but we've made some progress seeing it happen for developments that include what could be classified as public dollars, although they all include some kind of public subsidy. But the point is that, so that's been, I was wondering where Shumi would come in at, but I guess it could be one of the benefits included in a community benefits package. Or as opposed to a competition between community benefits and Shumi. Well, because they're looking at us like we can't afford community benefits. And so if it seems like a second thing, it would seem like it would be harder. Because it's been hard enough to even bring up the conversation of any kind of community benefit.
Yeah, I work with really closely with Core Magazine and the Homefulness Project, and they've created something called community reparations, where they are working to get people to help them to build housing without having to take dollars from corporations. And they actually just finished building a fourplex where they're going to have forever homes for people that are formerly houseless. And so I think that there's a lot of great ideas out there, and I think that there is an abundance in the Bay Area. And one of the things that I like to talk about is that, that in this territory, there's always abundance. And we know in the Bay Area that there's an abundance of resources here, that we should not think about a scarcity model, that's what gets us in this fear place, but that we need to come together to figure out how we're all able to work and live in this land and to caretake for it and bring all the richness of all of our cultures together to do that. And so I don't never think about it as a way of taking from somebody, but how do we come together to ensure that everyone has the right place to be.
Thank you. We have time for maybe one more question.
One more, and then I'd like to go have dinner.
Oh, yes. Do we have, is there anyone who would like to,
With a burning desire.
yeah, let me just go to my next panel. This has been a wonderful group tonight. Corrina, we don't have to wait, but
Let's
would
take
you
a
be
night.
willing to take questions if people have a lingering question? I could send it to you.
Yeah, that's
And then
fine. And I put shellmoundwork@gmail.com in the chat.
Oh, great. Okay. Fantastic. Well, this has just been wonderful. And thank you so much. Thank you to everyone. We can maybe all commit to some of these wonderful ideas and think about them. I'm sure we all will in the future. So thank you so much.